I want to start with a moment you probably recognize. It's late. Not late like 9 p.m. late. Late like the kind of late where the house is completely quiet and the only light on is the one above your desk. And you're still there, still working, still moving through the list that never actually ends. And somewhere in that silence, a thought surfaces. Not a dramatic thought, not a crisis, just a quiet, honest one. This is not what I pictured when I started this. You pictured freedom. You pictured building something that was yours, something that reflected who you are and what you believe and how you want to work. You did not picture being a one-person customer service department, content studio, operations team, finance function, and strategy consultancy all at the same time, every single day, indefinitely. But here you are. And here is what I want to say to you before we go any further. The problem is not you. The problem is not your discipline. It is not your work ethic. It is not even the volume of work, though the volume is real. The problem is your org chart. You have one. Every business does. The difference is that most solo founders have never seen theirs, and what they cannot see, they cannot change. Tonight, that changes. Section 2. The real problem. Let me ask you something. When you think about what needs to happen in your business this week, just this week, how many different types of work are on that list? There's the thinking work, the strategy, the planning, the decisions about where the business goes next. There's the creative work, content to write, ideas to develop, offers to refine. There's the operational work, tools to manage, files to organize, schedules to maintain. There's the relational work, inquiries to respond to, clients to follow up with, community to nurture. There's the financial work, numbers to track, invoices to send, performance to review. And then there's everything in between. Now here's the question underneath that question. Who is doing all of that work? If you're a solo founder, the answer is you. All of it, in whatever order the urgency of the moment dictates. And here is what that costs you. There's a concept in cognitive science called attention residue. When you move from one type of task to another, from writing a strategic plan to answering a customer inquiry to editing a piece of content, your brain does not switch cleanly. It carries fragments of the previous task into the next one. It takes somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes to return to full cognitive depth after each switch. Multiply that by how many times a day you context switch. You are not losing hours. You are losing the quality of your thinking. The most important cognitive resource you have, your capacity for deep, original, strategic thought, is being consumed by the friction of constant task switching. And the tragedy is this. The work that actually determines whether your business thrives or stagnates, the strategic thinking, the creative vision, the decisions that shape the future, that work requires exactly the kind of sustained, uninterrupted cognitive depth that constant task switching destroys. You are doing $500 an hour thinking in $15 an hour conditions. That is not a discipline problem. That is an architecture problem.
Section 3. The shift.
I want to offer you a reframe, not a tactic, not a tool recommendation, a genuinely different way of seeing what you are building. The CEO of a 10-person company does not answer every customer email. They do not write every piece of content from scratch. They do not manually manage every operational process. They have a team. Each person on that team has a clearly defined role, a specific scope of responsibility, and a defined output they are accountable for delivering. The CEO's job is not to do the work. It is to design the work, direct the work, and make the decisions that only they can make. Now, here's the counterintuitive part. You do not need a team to operate like a CEO. You need an org chart. And in 2026, for the first time in history, you can staff that org chart not with people, but with systems, with AI tools, with automations, with intentionally designed workflows that handle specific functions so consistently and so well that the output is indistinguishable from what a competent employee would produce. I call this the invisible employee framework, And the word invisible is deliberate because these employees do not show up in your payroll. They do not need to be managed in the traditional sense. They do not get tired, distracted, or inconsistent. They simply execute the functions they were designed for, reliably, every week. The question is not whether you can afford to build this team. The question is whether you can afford not to. Section 4. The 7 roles. Every solo business, regardless of what it sells or how it operates, requires 7 distinct functions to run at a high level. Most founders are personally performing all 7 simultaneously, with no structure, no separation, and no system. The result is the kind of permanent low-grade chaos that feels normal after a while, but is slowly consuming the energy that the business actually needs from you. Let me walk you through each role. Role 1, the strategist. This is you, the version of you that thinks about where the business is going, what the next move is, what is working, what is not, and what needs to change. The strategist does not write content, does not answer emails, does not manage operations. The strategist thinks, decides, and directs. Now, here's the honest assessment most founders never do. How many hours per week are you actually operating as the strategist? Not thinking about the business while doing something else, not half planning while answering messages. Actually sitting with the strategy of the business, undistracted, unhurried, fully present. For most solo founders, the answer is somewhere between 2 and 5 hours per week. The goal of this framework is to get that number to 15 or 20, because the strategist is the only role in your business that cannot be systematized, automated, or replaced. Everything else can, and that means everything else should be. Role 2, the content producer. This role handles all the creation of content, scripts, newsletters, posts, outlines, emails. Here is where most people use AI backwards. They ask AI to generate the ideas, they get something generic, they spend hours trying to make it sound like them. They get frustrated, and they conclude that AI is not useful for their creative work. The right sequence is the opposite. You generate the ideas. You develop the core observation, the framework, the specific angle that comes from your actual experience and thinking. Then you bring in the content producer, your AI-supported production system, to help you develop, structure, and produce it at speed. You're thinking first, AI's production capacity second. This is not a subtle distinction. It is the difference between content that sounds like everyone else and content that sounds unmistakably like you. Role 3, the operations manager. This role handles everything that keeps the business running in the background: file organization, tool maintenance, scheduling systems, process documentation. It's the least glamorous role. It's also the one that, when neglected, creates the invisible drag that slows everything else down. The operations manager in your invisible employee team is a combination of automation, templates, and documented standard procedures. It should require no more than 2 hours of your direct attention per week once it is properly built. Most founders currently give it 20, scattered across the week in unplanned, reactive bursts. Building this role cleanly is not exciting, but it is the foundation everything else stands on. Role 4, the customer experience lead. Every interaction someone has with your business before they buy, during, and after is this role's responsibility. Inquiry responses, onboarding sequences, follow-up communications. The quality, consistency, and warmth of those touchpoints determines how people feel about working with you. With the right systems, templated responses, automated sequences, clear protocols, this function can be handled at a genuinely high level without requiring your direct creative energy every single time. You are not removing the human element, you are removing the unnecessary repetition in friction so that your actual human attention can go where it matters most. Role 5, the data analyst.
Your business is generating information constantly: what is converting, what is not, where the audience comes from, what content performs, which offers resonate. Most founders either ignore this data or drown in it. Neither serves you. The data analyst role is about building a simple, clean dashboard, not an overwhelming spreadsheet, not a vanity metrics report, just the handful of numbers that tell you whether the business is healthy and what decision needs to be made next. 15 minutes with the right data once a week is worth more than hours of intuition-based guessing. Role 6, the marketing distributor. Creating content is one challenge. Getting it consistently in front of the right people is another. For most solo founders, distribution is an afterthought, something that happens after the real work, in whatever time is left, which means it happens inconsistently, incompletely, and at the end of the day when cognitive energy is depleted. The marketing distributor role is a systematized workflow, a repurposing protocol, a scheduling system, built once, refined over time, running reliably without requiring your full attention every cycle. Role 7, the financial officer. Revenue tracking, expense monitoring, pricing review, invoicing. This role should take 30 minutes per week with the right system in place. For most founders, financial clarity is something that happens occasionally, often in response to anxiety rather than as a regular, grounded practice. The result is decision-making that is reactive rather than informed. 30 minutes per week, structured and consistent, that's all this role requires.
Section 5. The framework. The Invisible Employee Framework runs on 3 principles. I call them the 3 Ds: design, delegate, direct. Design is the upfront work. Before you build any system or deploy any tool, you need precision about what that role is supposed to produce. What does done look like? What is the quality standard? What decisions does this function handle independently, and what comes to you? Most people skip design. They go straight to the tool, and then they wonder why the output feels off or inconsistent, or like it requires just as much of your time as doing it manually would have. The system did not fail. The design was never done. You cannot automate clarity you never created. Delegate is the transfer. This is where the tools, the automations, and the AI-supported workflows come in. But delegation in this framework is not use this app for this task. It is a handoff protocol, a clear input, a defined process, a specific output format, and a quality standard. When you delegate to a person, you give them context and expectations. When you delegate to a system, the same principle applies. The quality of what comes back is determined by the quality of what you put in. Direct is your ongoing role once the systems are functioning. You are not doing the work. You are reviewing the outcomes, making adjustments, and making the decisions that only you can make. This is the CEO function. This is where your energy belongs. The transition from doing to directing is the most important professional shift a solo founder can make. And it is not a single moment. It is a practice. Every week, you identify one task you are still personally doing that belongs in a different role. You design the system for it, you delegate it, and you reclaim that time for the strategist. Done consistently, this practice compounds in a way that almost nothing else in business does. Section 6. The identity beneath the system. I want to be honest about something. The reason most founders do not build what I have described today is not a knowledge problem. The information exists, the tools exist, the frameworks exist. The reason most founders stay stuck is an identity problem. When you build something alone, when you have been the person who figures everything out, who handles whatever comes up, who keeps the whole thing running through sheer force of will, that identity becomes part of you. The capable, self-sufficient, do-it-all founder. It becomes quietly part of how you measure your own worth. And so the act of building systems that reduce your direct involvement, even in the tasks you do not enjoy, even in the work that exhausts you, feels threatening. Not logically, emotionally.
Because if the business does not need you to do everything, who are you? I want to offer you a different answer to that question. You are the strategist, the only person in the business whose thinking cannot be replicated, automated, or replaced. The person's vision, judgment, and original perspective is the actual engine of everything the business creates. That person does not need to be buried under operational tasks to matter. That person matters most when they have the time, the space, and the cognitive clarity to think clearly. Busyness is not a measure of commitment. It is often the opposite. The most committed thing you can do for the business you are building is to create the conditions in which your best thinking can actually happen. The invisible employee framework is not about working less. It is about finally working as yourself. Section 7. Conclusion. When you started this, when you made the decision to build something on your own, you had a reason. Maybe it was freedom. Maybe it was impact. Maybe it was simply the desire to build something that was genuinely, unmistakably yours. You are not trying to build a job that owns you. You are trying to build a vehicle for something larger than the daily to-do list. The invisible employee framework is how you close the gap between the business you are running and the one you set out to build. Not by grinding more, not by optimizing harder, but by thinking clearly about what the business needs from you and building the systems that free you to provide it. The most leveraged investment you will ever make in your business is not the next tool, the next offer, or the next piece of content. It is the architecture that allows you to stop doing everything so you can finally do the one thing that only you can do. Think, decide, build forward. That was always the job.